How are policy agendas formed? Include interactions and dynamics among actors, interests, institutions, and processes in the discussion. There are about 5 basic steps that outline the implementation of public policy: the national agenda, formulation, adoption, implementation, evaluation. The choice of certain policies that are chosen depend on several factors. One of these factors is the occurrence of a popular trend. One trend could include the violent crimes from the 80s and 90s in which the public wished for better public enforcement of law. Another trigger for the public policy agenda is the action of a significant event. Events may occur that bring light to certain issues in which the people will want to act upon that issue that they are aware of. September 11th was a significant event that brought light to the issue of terrorism and set that as a priority during the Bush administration. ISIS proves as another possible example, but the government has not significantly acted on this. The NAACP has proved several times the power of an interest group and their effect on the public agenda. Presidents are able to bring issues to light through their speeches. One example of this is the State of the Union speech. Trace the enactment of public policies by Congress and the President. During the Progressive era of the 1900s, public policy was specifically aiming at monopolies and worker rights, as well as worker protections. During the New Deal, the government focused on pro-labor policies, as well as general regulation of business. During the 60s and 70s, the consumer was significant, and the environment became even more in question as policies were aimed at that. After the heavy regulation, more modern presidents took initiative to deregulate airlines and railroads to some degree, such as Ford and Carter. Reagan himself even cut regulation agency funding by 20% and basically supported deregulation. Discuss the implementation and interpretation of policies by the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy has control of the implementation of public policy. This is called bureaucratic discretion. According to their views or the influence of particular interest groups, the bureaucracy can alter or change policy's implementation to favor the influence of their interest groups or of their political ideology. By favoring interest groups and other groups, bureaucratic officials will be able to keep themselves in power. Discuss the implementation and interpretation of policies by the courts in the policy process. Plessy v. Ferguson created the concept of separate but equal facilities by the court. This court case was brought down by the new case Brown v. Board of Education. One case that showed unequal affirmative action was the case of Regents of the University of California v. Back. In this case, the admission policies were considered unconstitutional, and Back was treated unfairly because race had been too strictly considered in the admission programs. Investigate and describe policy networks and issue networks in at least 3 domestic policy areas. Agriculture. Iron triangles are prevalent through agriculture. Agricultural interest groups, like the Pistachio Farmers of America, want subsidies for planting pistachios. Unfortunately, it takes about 7 years for a full tree to mature to the point where they can produce harvestable pistachios. As a result, they lobby and petition the Senate and House committees on agriculture to receive subsidies for pistachios. Education. The current issue with education is strongly a federalism problem. The federal government created Common Core as the national testing device. However, the states and local governments are in charge of the implementation of academic curriculum. As a result, the states who disagree with the Common Core choose not to implement it, and there is a divide between all the states in terms of education. Welfare. Many programs include Medicare are available for people who cannot afford health care and are in need of it. One example is Obamacare. Although considered highly disliked, it is a method to fund health care. However, it is not implemented everywhere due to the federalistic disagreement between the states and national government. Investigate and describe policy networks and issue networks in at least 3 foreign policy areas. The President has the power to make executive agreements, which are agreements that do not require Senate approval. As chief diplomat, the President is in control of negotiating treaties with foreign nations, and the executive agreement is necessary for these relations when the President has to bypass the Senate. 2. In terms of presidential action, Congress is in control of the purse strings. When it comes to giving money or other appropriations to the other countries, Congress makes the executive approval. Only Congress can regulate trade with foreign countries and declare war as well. 3. The Secretary of State is able to coordinate all foreign affairs that fall in lines with the President's ideology. However, the Secretary of State can fall victim to the influence of career politician influence in their actions. Identify and describe the impact of federalism on policy processes and policymaking in the federal context. In regards to welfare policy, the states have the ability to enact policy on their states and receive money from the taxpayers to fund these programs. They may also receive funding from the federal government. Some programs include WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and food stamp programs. Obamacare is another welfare program the government created to help with medical care. However, the states are responsible for enacting it. As a result of their distaste for this particular program, they are defying the federal government's wishes in some cases. In regards to environmental policy, the federal government may create programs or laws to address certain issues. The states in turn may alter, make stricter, or lighten the laws made. One example of this policy includes the Environmental Protection Agency. In some cases, the Environmental Protection Agency of certain states may be strict, while in others it may be lighter, all depending on federalism and the decision that each state makes and chooses to make. Identify and describe the impact of interest groups on policy processes and policymaking in the federal context. Interest groups fight for one specific cause and try to lobby and get bills favoring their beliefs passed. As a result, some interest groups have a lot of influence. The groups with immense amounts of influence get their legislation pushed to importance and alter the agenda in that aspect. Interest groups such as the NAACP try to push their policy through litigation. Donations are another form of influence that interest groups use. Identify and describe the impact of political parties and on policy processes and policymaking in the federal context. The goal of political parties is to gain power for their cause. Through success in elections, they can put themselves in power, in which will allow them control in Congress. This control will help set policy agenda and what policies are considered as a priority. Political parties stand with two viewpoints on public policy. Conservatives, who tend to be Republicans, feel that there is too much government regulation and that the government should let society run itself, while liberals, who tend to be Democrats, feel that they should regulate policy a lot in order to protect the people from corruption. Identify and describe the impact of elections on policy processes and policymaking in the federal context. During elections, certain politicians bring to light certain issues of significance that would help grab the public attention and gain more votes for themselves. Hillary Clinton, in her campaign ads, is using the motif, "the people and the underdogs." In her videos, she includes many feminine subjects, gay couples, blue-collar workers, and minority race people to show that she is pro for their rights and their causes, despite the fact that most of her funding comes from big businesses and banks, whereas her competitor and possible spoiler, Bernie Sanders, got his funding from interest groups of blue-collar workers and the people. In addition, whoever wins the election will bring power to their political party and their ideologies.